Good evening, folks. And a lot of new faces, so welcome. Thank you for coming tonight. Tonight's speaker will be David Baasch. He's our
Endangered Species
You name
Specialist.
it, you know, I'm trying to a little of everything.
Yep.
Sorry, Endangered Species expert, and he'll be talking about the history of the crane trust. So please, let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Billy. This is gonna drive me nuts. Sorry. Give me 1 second here. We're getting feedback here bad. I ain't gonna be able to pull this off. These guys don't want to hear me. I certainly don't want to hear myself. Can you hear me now? One of those people that want to know the hiking trail.
Yeah, I think they just come, but not just clean. That kind of rubbish and bones and things like that. Hope I don't lock them up.
Things all locksmith. Like you're gonna find any clothes.
Well, I would. Yeah, they went for a walk down the trail. And I looked down and I couldn't see anything at that time, but. First time
Okay, want to get back to the first slide.
No, that was good.
Okay, like Billy said, I'm Dave Baasch, and I'm the Threatened and Endangered Species Specialist with the Crane Trust. What that means is basically I deal with everything that's either listed as threatened and endangered or a candidate species to be considered for listings. There's a lot of species coming down the pipeline that are being considered for listing on the Endangered Species Act. So there's plenty to do as far as different wildlife species we're trying to protect. Tonight I want to go over the history of the Crane Trust briefly. Then I'll talk about some of the little research projects we're involved in. And then the focus of the presentation is going to be on sandhill cranes and then whooping cranes though. Most of you may know, or some of you may know, the Platte River or the Platte River Whooping Crane Maintenance Trust came to be out of a Missouri Basin Power Company project. Wanting to put a dam on the Laramie River, the Gray Rocks Dam on the Laramie River. The state of Nebraska and the National Wildlife Federation raised an objection to that project, claiming that the project would jeopardize irrigation rights as well as the species on the Central Platte River by taking the water from the Platte River. And one species they were primarily focused on when the litigation was going on was the whooping crane. In 1978, the court ruled that this project could continue as long as they established what now is the Crane Trust to protect habitat for migratory species and threatened and endangered species on the Central Platte River. The mission of the Crane Trust is to protect and maintain the physical, hydrological, and biological integrity of the Big Bend area of the Platte River, so it continues to function as a life support system for the many species that depend upon it. sango cranes, and hundreds of other migratory birds. We accomplished our mission through land management, scientific research, and education. So now I'm going to talk briefly on the land management and scientific research that we do. As far as land management goes, I just heard from Bill Tagg at Rose Sanctuary the start of maintenance, river maintenance for cranes actually began back in the 50s with hedge trimmers and chainsaws to clear the vegetation to make room for cranes to roost in the river. And that has developed, and now we use everything from chainsaws to large machinery to remove the bigger trees. We just channel on a near annual basis. Most every year we end up disking the channel to get the vegetation out. What you can see on the top screen there is all the islands are heavily vegetated. If those aren't disked and taken care of, they soon develop into a willow tree forest. Then they mature into a cottonwood forest, and certainly ruins the habitat conditions for the cranes. We also use prescribed fire on the landscape to maintain or set back the noxious invasive species like cedar trees and roughen olive and those type of plants. And then we use grazing, bison and cattle grazing to maintain the integrity of the grasslands. Some land management activities. You can see the channel is very vegetated. I'll watch a quick video here and show you the process. This is what it looks like today. Normally like I say, they're out there with their hedge trimmers and or shears or whatever else they can get their hands on to trim this vegetation back. But you can see he's taking about a 12-foot swath out there, which is much faster than it used to be, but still a very slow process. Usually just these vegetation, you gotta just 2 or 3 times, different angles to get it broken up, get the root balls broken up so the river can carry that sediment away and widen the channel. About 24 more hours and we'll be done with this work.
Oh. Do they get stuck?
Usually about once a year we end up, or years of time, having to take a bigger tractor out to get them unburied. But Tim Smith, our land manager, does most of the disking himself, and he's gotten pretty good at not getting stuck, so that's helped a bunch. The first years was pretty messed though, sounds like, from what I heard. What you end up with for a vegetated channel like that, once the flows come through, that's what you end up with, a nice wide channel that's right out here, well, right out in front of the Crane Trust headquarters. And that channel, like I say, all those islands will be vegetated. There wouldn't be much channel left had it not been for all the disking efforts and vegetation spraying, everything else that happens to keep the channel wide open for trains. Some of the research projects we're involved in. We study everything from birds and bees and butterflies and moths and frogs to small mammals, livestock, vegetation, the hydrology, sand hill cranes, open drains. So basically, it is living out there. We study it.
What is that word that starts with an A?
Endurance, it's frogs and toads. So. Another video, one of the main research projects most of you guys are probably familiar with is the counting cranes. During the migration season, every week they send out an update of how many cranes they estimate are on the Central Platte River between Chapman and Overton. And this is about a 9-minute video that goes through that process. I think it's a really cool video, so we'll just sit back and watch this for Well, the next 9 minutes.
$2,400 in the first group. $1,300 in the second group. $9,000, 2,400. Everybody ready? Yep. $15,300 sandhill cranes. Starting to roost 2 trumpeter swans. I got 2,000 darkies. I got another 5,600 sandhill cranes starting to roost.
My name is Andy Caven. I'm the Director of Conservation Research at the Crane Trust. Our mission is to protect the biological and hydrological integrity of the Big Bend reach of the Platte River to serve as a life support system in migration for whooping cranes, sandhill cranes, and other migratory birds. We conducted an aerial sandhill crane survey this morning. The Crane Trust has been conducting those for over 20 years, and I've been leading those surveys for the last 7 years. We fly for 10 weeks from mid-February to mid-April. We wake up dark 30. Usually we get to the trust around 5:15, 5:20. Drive to the Hastings airfield where we meet our current pilot, Paul Dunning. We fly to Chapman, Nebraska, and then we fly the 82 miles along the main channel of the Platte River south to Overton, Nebraska. Everybody asks me, why don't you use drones? And one reason is drones actually can't really work at this scale yet. At least not the kind most conservationists can afford.
You know, it's actually a lot busier than a guy thinks. They've got certain distance they want away from the river, so he can make his count at a fairly low altitude, and in my plane I've got to be fairly slow. And I'm looking out for other birds, because there's always a ton of geese and ducks and cranes. We're watching out for other traffic. I'm watching out for towers and stuff like that, and then they ask me, hey, would you look in the fields to the south of you and see if you can find any birds so we can count them. So we're very busy in the airplane. I might not look it, but I'm constantly scanning and looking all over the place.
Lots of snows right now. They're everywhere. Let me know if it's unsafe, buddy. Nowhere I can go anyway. They're on all sides of me. All quadrants. They seem to be aware of my presence, and they're leaving the area.
He's a great pilot in general. We probably fly in like terrible conditions and it would just be like smooth sailing. We don't, obviously, but like he has so much experience that we could basically do anything and I'd feel safe.
Yeah, so Jenna's amazing. She's integral to this process. Well, I am counting. She is taking the GPS point of the roost and recording all that data.
Aircraft Grand Isle Towers now up with class Delta service now provided Grand Isle Regional Airport. Wind 300 at 5, altimeter 2999er, landing at 435.
800 sandhill cranes.
Skywake 74 Charlie Fox, just letting you know that we're westbound along the south side of the river, basically straight south of the airport now, flight of 2. Calvin 4 Charlie Foxtrot Grand Isle Tower, Roger morning, altimeter 2999.
6,000 sandhill cranes. 2,300 sandhill cranes.
What's that?
2,300 sandhill cranes, and then one group of 300 sandhill cranes.
I want to double check to verify three Grand Islands at the same time. We had 2,000, 2,000, 6,000, 800, 2,300, 300.
Yeah.
Wait, sweet.
Okay. There's two white birds. Let's circle over the river real quick. Circle the river. Shoot, get your camera ready. Circle tight, Paul.
All right, we're gonna make a right-hand turn.
Ready.
Yeah, right on top of all these snows too.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We're right on top of the whoopers, though. Pretty damn sure those are whoopers.
I don't know, they don't seem very tall.
Yeah, I think they're swans. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, there's our wink.
We'll go with two swans then. Nice circling, Paul, with all the variables going on, man. Thank you.
Yep.
You fly over, you count the birds, and you count in a grouping sense, you know. I usually, if I have time, you know, I'll count out 10, multiply that 10 in place, have my 50, 100, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 500, 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and go like that. Like, visually, you're counting the number of birds, see how big that polygon is, and then replicating it in space.
It's like go, 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 go the entire time, and then at the end you kind of have like a sigh of relief, and you're like, oh, we did it, we made it.
Usually those guys, you know, they'll take a nap on the way back home, and I understand that. I mean, try to think about counting 600 to 800,000 cranes in a 1 hour and 15-minute flight. That's an insane amount of birds to try to count.
It's an hour of maxing your brain out, and you know, it's over. We enter all our data in our long-term database, and I write a little public blurb. I'll release that count the day after we do it to the public, and everybody gets excited there's more birds. What we hope they take away from it is this is one of the last great migrations on Earth. In reality, we're collecting it for, you know, different reasons. We're here technically for the whooping crane. And the sandhill cranes can be a pretty good surrogate for whooping cranes. The whooping cranes also like wide open views, shallow water depth, riparian wetlands. There's still a semblance of that American Serengeti left here. And we hope that that inspires people to want to preserve it. I think that's why the big numbers are important. We still have this amazing thing to come and witness. It is not just the largest gathering of cranes in North America, it's the largest gathering of cranes in the world.
The number reflects how much hard work, not just the Crane Trust is doing, but like other conservation organizations. They're extremely hard workers. Like, they're not going to give up without a fight.
This study really helps us, one, look at how the ecosystem's changing over time, and two, serves as an indicator of how well all us conservation organizations are doing. And what's happened is the once wide-braided Prairie River has become much more woodland-dominated. This started in the 1890s, but most changes have been observed since the completion of Kingsley Dam in the late 1930s. In the 1950s, peak abundance of sandhill cranes was in the Kozad, Gothenburg area, which we don't even count anymore because there's 0 cranes. So the character of the river has changed. Counting cranes has really taught us that these cranes are coming earlier, staying longer, shifting east, and packing in to fewer areas where the river has changed less. and there's still significant treeless expanses of meadow and prairie. We found that the places there's still large expanses of wet meadows, there's increasing densities of sandhill cranes. If I was, could go like that and change things, change the world with snap my fingers, I'd like to see a meadow prairie corridor within a half mile either side of the main channel of the Platte River. Counting cranes has also taught us that the number of cranes is increasing. There's always a risk with disease and high densities and everything else, but they're, a species that I'm hopeful about. Our job's not done. What we need to do is think about the health of all these species, and if we think big, and we make the Platte River the best place it can be. In 50 years, this could be a stronghold and an important migration stopover and breeding area, not just for species that are our targets now, but for many more species at threat 50 years from now. So if we succeed for the cranes, we succeed for all this other stuff, right? And we have to think big.
Yes.
For our Oregon friends, when they were saying groups of white, that was snow geese, correct?
On the river, yes.
Yeah.
Yep, large groups are gonna be your snow geese, yep.
Yeah, I don't think it's that.
Now, they'll be, I'm gonna throw out 5 to 10 million snow geese. They usually come a little bit earlier in February, and they stay for a few weeks, then they move on. But during that time, there's a big overlap between the massive sandhill cranes and the snow geese. So, like Paul was saying on the video, they're flying. The snow geese leave the river early, and just flying is dangerous. Just because of all the snow geese in the air, and you get sandhill cranes that leave the river, so they're dodging cranes and towers and a lot of different things going on. Anything else on the video?
That was really good. We've never seen that one before.
Yeah, good.
Is that on the website for the Crane Trust?
It is. It's called,
Okay.
just counting cranes.
Because I saw things I'd never seen before. That was
Yeah.
amazing.
Great video, that's for sure. They put that out here 2 years ago, and got my hands on that. And it's part of my presentation.
Was the count down quite a bit this year, previous years?
I believe this year, their peak count they got was 460,000 or something like that, which was down from before. But what they also observed this year, they hadn't been observing in the past, is there was large groups of sandhill cranes roosting 6-7 miles from the channel. And just not, I think that some of it could be that there was just very little to no flow in the river. Another possible reason for that would be they were flying 6, 7, 8, up to 10 miles to go feed. Rather than flying 20 miles in a day just to get feed, they might have just hunkered down there and spent the night and came back whenever they needed water type of situation.
So it was probably not that the number of cranes was actually less, but that they weren't all in the river.
Correct. And cranes also, another thing, since they're having to fly so far to feed, we're leaving the river earlier than normal. So there's counting in the river is a lot, it's not easy by no means, but it's a lot easier than trying to count them when they're flying or out in cornfields down the river. And so anyway, so that's most likely the reason the counts were lower this year. We were actually part of a study where they flew at night with thermal imagery, and they've got a computer, they got some computer software that's going to actually count the cranes for them, the little white dots that show up in the thermal imagery. And the problem they had that they tried to pass, what they ran into was the computer algorithm wasn't able to determine whether it was a sandhill crane or a snow goose. Visually looking at the picture, it's obvious because snow geese are just in a real tight mass and teeny tiny dots. But the computer was having problems picking out the difference between snow geese and sandhill. So we went out and it's our little spot and observed where the snow geese were roosting versus where the sandhills were, so they could train their computer system to count only the sandhill cranes. So I'll be interested to see how that all turns out. I know they're doing it again next year. We got a pretty good grant for that to do it again next year, so I'll be excited to see. And those counts will be always come in 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 higher than our counts will. So if we say 500,000, there's probably closer to 800,000 or 900,000 on the river. Just that many birds have left the river before the plane gets from Chapman all the way to Overton. So yeah, we're interested to see if that new technology does work. It just makes a lot more sense to do that. Let the computer count for you rather than estimate what they're doing now. There's a lot of computer time that goes into what they're doing now. Not only do they fly it and get their estimate, they take pictures of a handful of roosts and they actually come back and on the computer screen count them one at a time. To see how that's how they come up with their estimate error. As well, that's why they have 500,000 plus or minus 90,000, whatever the number might be. It's because they said the roost of the error was 30,000. There was actually only 28,200 or something. So that's how they come up with that error margin in there. But yeah, this new technology could save us from having to do these flights with 2 people on a pilot. So another thing Andy mentioned about the drones. Another problem with having drones, not only the technology not only is the technology out there either not available or too expensive for a nonprofit to acquire, but if you fly a drone the whole distance of the river, somebody's got to still sit at the computer and count the birds. And now, and the drone, you get the picture of the river only, and when these guys are flying, they get the birds in the river, plus they're looking for cornfield roosts as well, so, or not roosts, birds foraging the cornfields as well. So drones are really not a good option, but there are some options maybe coming down the pipeline that will be as good or better than what we're doing now.
Dave, what's causing them to have to fly so far to forage? Are we just not having enough waste corn or meadows, wet meadows nearby, or what's causing that?
The meadows haven't changed. All the meadows are going to be right along the river. 99% of them are. The biggest difference is combines are getting more efficient. So, and around this area, for some reason this year, a lot of the fields close to the river have to be soybeans. Not that they won't eat them, but they want to go to cornfields. Then you got the snow geese that feed them here. You get 5 to 10 million snow geese here eating the same food. By the time the cranes get here, that just pushes them a little further out. And then you got cattle grazing. And just a combination of everything eliminates the corn that's near the river. Some flippers grain research we're doing. We're doing behavioral monitoring of the whooping cranes. This year we started another study looking at the chemical exposure of whooping cranes and sandhill cranes to waste grain. When they consume the waste grain, what residual chemicals are in that corn that they're consuming. We're studying that. And then I got a new publication we're working on, root site selection in response to drought. During dry conditions, are these birds using more rivers? Are they using more large lakes? How are they shifting between wet times and dry times? And give an indication of what's really important during dry times, especially because during wet times there's a lot of wetlands out there, and they'll pick any wetland. It's just during the droughts you run into problems. As far as behavioral monitoring goes, we respond to public sightings and help to get access to the telemetry data. That telemetry data now provides information every 30 minutes, so we know where the birds are. And when anything's in central Nebraska here, either I go out or if I'm chasing other birds and I send other people out, or technicians for employees out to chase birds, but we use spotting scopes, binoculars, and long-range photography, and a lot of video. We view from public roads or blinds. We don't enter property if we don't have access to it or permission to access to it. We record behavior of each bird for 30 minutes. We record every minute what they're doing for a minimum of 30 minutes, unless they get up and leave, and when they go to the next field, start over again. The behaviors we're looking for is the foraging, walking, social, loafing, preening, and alert behaviors. We'll get into a little bit of this here in a second. So far, the last couple of years, we've got 357 unique whooping crane documented. 303 of those are adults, 54 of those are juveniles, and just short of 30,000 individual observations. So spend a lot of time on the ground watching whooping cranes, which is a passion of mine. I love it. Even my mom gets to go with me all the time.
We want to tell our Oregon friends what, not too many years ago, what, like right now it's 357, but not too long ago. I don't know the numbers.
The populations, yeah. Back in the 1940s, there was only between 15 and 20 whooping cranes in the world. Now that number, this migratory population that comes through here is a year ago it was 500. They estimate 543. So this year I'm assuming we're around at 570, just based on the population growth curve. So 570, 575 is what I'm estimating this number this year to China come in. So they made a great comeback, but they certainly aren't there yet. They aren't recovered yet. But and there was a recent publication came out. I can't remember the author of it, but it was looking at all the different species publications that were out there on threatened and endangered species in the world. And they said they named 3 species that they said that the research is actually directing management for and actually being beneficial to them. And whooping cranes is one of them. So a lot of the research we're doing is being put on the ground and actually implemented, which that doesn't happen very often. A lot of times, the author will publish a paper and say, "Well, this should happen next," and then nothing happens with it. It just goes by the wayside. So whooping cranes have been a great comeback story. Other things we documented are what they're eating. We try to take pictures or video of individual items they're eating, which is quite difficult. If you miss by a split second, they've swallowed, and so you gotta get pretty lucky to get some good photos, but luckily we have. We also look at response to aircraft. Nebraska Air National Guard out of Grand Island is actually funding this project because a few years ago they were flying a Chinook helicopter across the Platte River and it unintentionally spooked some whooping cranes. And so anyway, they got limited to where they can fly and where they can't fly during migration season and stuff. So anyway, they're wanting to see are these birds really reacting to these aircraft or not. So we're looking at that for them. We're also looking at eagle crane interactions. A few years ago, we had a whooping crane on the Loop River that bald eagle came down and didn't kill it, but had his head underwater for quite some time. And anyway, the Loop crane ended up fighting it off and survived. So that was pretty fortunate for that bird because bald eagles can take out a crane pretty quick. I've seen those sandhill cranes a couple different times, but they ain't a pretty sight. Okay, the behavioral observations. This is a summation of those 30,000 observations collected over the last couple of years. What you'll notice is the blue bars are like your croplands, your corn, soybeans, and that kind of stuff. And burgundy or red bars are your natural habitats, so your flushing wetlands, lakes, rivers, wet meadows, and stuff that hasn't been disturbed, hasn't been farmed. What you'll notice is on the left side, the first 3, alert and defensive, happens way more in crop fields. They spend a lot more time walking and searching food in crop fields, foraging in crop fields, and those are energy demanding activities. You get on the right side where you're talking about your loafing, your preening, your social interactions, and kind of more relaxed behaviors. those were all higher in the natural habitat. So that's the kind of information we're trying to pick out of this. And when it comes time to analyze this data and publish it, actually, we'll break out the habitat types for wet meadows and rivers and crop fields, and we'll break it out by habitat type. But this is just a quick summary of what we're seeing so far. Oops.
When did you start that study? Or how many years has that study been going?
Andy Cavens, the first year they actually collected really data was the fall, or I'm sorry, spring of 2019. They didn't collect anything, and they happened to be blind and saw some interesting stuff going on, so they started just jotting it down. And then he decided he's gonna make a study out of it. And so I came on in the fall of 2020, yeah, and was a contractor for him, and that's when it really picked up when we started really focusing on this research and being really intentional about what we're doing. So like this year I saw 109 wolf cranes I had my eyes on this year. So a lot of birds, just between the Platte River and Loop River and the different basins around the area. So yeah, they used to, if they catch a handful of birds in a year, that's just what they're after. But they made it a focus now. So here's a little bit of social interaction. A video, it takes a couple minutes, but actually about 90 seconds. Okay, it's going in this one. Going to the sound. I think the sound's going to be very weird. I didn't hear that.
Morning or dusk?
Morning.
It was male or female?
I can't tell.
Can't tell.
No. I'm assuming there's at least one male in there, maybe two males. I'm assuming at least one of each, but it's just hard to say.
So then markings on it.
No three of us identical. Over the years, I've seen a lot of interactions between cranes, but I've never had one last a minute and a half, and they were very active the whole time, so that was pretty cool. As far as diet items, we've gotten pictures of and confirmed so far. I've got 16 different fish. A lot of those were catfish on the river, on the Platte River. I actually got some pictures of a soft-shelled whooping crane, soft shell turtle, 4 frogs. They got 3 of those this year, and then 8 different insects, usually dragonfly larvae that we can pick up that tell them who they are. But you get pretty lucky to get the picture because it doesn't take them long to swallow that item. Responses to aircraft so far. We've had 91 individual encounters so far. Full flying aircraft, and 32 of them resulted in alert reactions. 3 times they actually took flight, and then on 60 occasions they didn't do anything. So about 2/3 of the time they don't react at all, but about 1/3 of the time they actually become aware and it does bother them. So, eagle crane interactions, you can see here, I think there's 9 bald eagles in the background, but we've actually witnessed 7 different wolf crane bald eagle interactions. Everything from a defensive posture, We've had 2 or 3 local cranes actually approach a bald eagle to shoo it away and jump out with they defend themselves with their feet. So they jump at it and rake at it with their feet. A couple different times the birds actually flushed, took off to avoid the eagle. Several alert and then several no reactions as well. This is the new study I mentioned earlier. We just started this spring. I got this year's sample sent in, this spring sample sent in for analysis. Then I'll finish it up this fall. We go out and collect a gallon of corn, which doesn't seem like that much until you start walking around a field trying to find some corn. But anyway, well, fortunately, I wish it. Usually wanted to go out and video me walking around. I'm gonna plant corn and plant corn here and there, and I'll bet you go out and picking it up. I'm not gonna walk everything for you. Anyway, we're gonna look at the pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides, heavy metals, the mycotoxins, and then neonicotinoids, which are largely the insecticides, mostly insecticides. So you don't have to see what they're being exposed to. It's not like there's a problem right now. We haven't noticed a problem with them. It's more of a curiosity. What are they actually consuming, especially in the fall, right after harvest, when they migrate back through. So most of these chemicals don't have tolerance levels established yet. So we won't be able to say, oh, this is causing a problem for the birds. It's just relative, I guess. Basically just seeing if they're exposed to it first, then we can start looking at they're capturing birds every year in wood buffalo and in Texas. And they can start testing the blood and the kidney and that kind of stuff for these different toxins if they're present in the corn to begin with, I guess. Local crane response to drought. This is just a new publication we're working on now. There's a group of us working on. We're using telemetry data from 2008 to 2022, and that includes about 8,500 different roost locations. And the scattered throughout the flyways, you can see in that figure to the right. We went through and classified each of those by hand, zoomed in each point. So okay, this land cover class with that land cover class. We have 3 people do every point, so we can come to a common agreement at the end. For the most part, we all agreed. We agreed on the vast majority of them, but there were some discrepancies we had to sit down and zoom into one by one and arm wrestle over. But and again, we're looking at how the roost site selection changes in response to drought, habitat use. A couple of the more recent local grant publications we've sent out, have published, I guess. Some of the findings are we find that they're selecting for not only the wetter portions of grasslands when they're in grasslands, but when they're in cornfields, they're actually selecting for the swales, the wetter portions of crop fields as well. So most of those wetter areas of crop fields used to be these lowland grassland meadows, but it got dry enough they could farm through it, so they do now. They also obviously select river landscapes near the river, so they aren't a fan of flying 10 miles to go pick up some corn. Then another thing we found is the stay length, the time they spend in a stopover location increases with wetland habitat. And so the more wetland habitat in an area, either lowland cropland or lowland grassland with wet meadow type of landscape, they'll stay longer. The next obvious question was, okay, if we're going to stay longer because of wet conditions, what makes these areas wet? We did a wet meadow hydrology study, and we found that these wet meadows, especially Mormon Island, respond very quickly to increases and decreases in river flow. So as the river comes up, the groundwater in the meadows come up and become more wet for the birds, and they're more likely to use them at that point. So, and obviously precipitation will make your grassland wet too. That's another one that's a key factor in that. And November of 2021, We actually had, the largest flock ever documented, in a single flock, during migration on the Platte River, this section of Crane Trust property.
We had the photographer right.
Photographer's right over here. I got this photo on the wall, courtesy of Colleen. So I love this photo, but there was 39 adults, 7 juveniles. They came in as 5 separate groups. And as the days went on, they just got joined together, and finally they all intermingled in a couple cornfields and then on the river as well. An update on whooping cranes. This is a serious concern of mine and a lot of people's. Fish and Wildlife Service and the federal government are now considering downlisting or even delisting whooping cranes. Even though there's only 550 or 70 in the world, or in the migratory population, the only self-sustaining population is the one that comes through here. There's the Louisiana flock that they introduced. That flock wouldn't exist if they didn't keep putting new birds in it every year. Same with the eastern migratory population. That population is not self-sustaining. It wouldn't exist if they didn't keep putting birds in it every year. So there's one flock that actually is sustaining itself, and that's the flock that comes through here. And they're considering downlisting or even, like I say, even delisting whooping cranes. There's still a ton of threats that they face. Obviously, I just mentioned there's only one self-sustaining population. Habitat loss, most of the expansion of crop ground has slowed down, at least in this area. But you get up north and even a little to the east now with the population shifting the migration to the east, but there's still a lot of agricultural expansion in that area. And so definite threat to the existence of whooping cranes. Another habitat loss threat that isn't thought of much is every time they put up these wind turbines, it's not only the risk of hitting the turbine, but they won't roost within, generally they won't roost within about 5 kilometers, so 3 miles of that wind turbine setup. The noise and disturbance and everything else is region behind that, where we assume. But anyway, it's not every time they put a wind turbine up, anything that's around that, wetland land cover class around that is no longer available to the birds. So there's a lot of losses due to the wind energy development. Disease and predation are another big risk with this mass congregation of sandhill cranes and the whooping cranes intermingling with them. There was a lot of concern this year about the highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. Luckily, we didn't have a big outbreak. Colorado had an outbreak. They had an outbreak over in Europe, not with sandhills, but with the Eurasian crane, and lost a lot of birds. So there's always a big threat of disease and predation. If they become delisted, hunting and poaching won't be a big deal anymore. Shooting a whooping crane be a slap on the hand rather than a federal felony and a punishable crime. There's still very low genetic diversity. These birds started with only less than 20 birds here about 80 years ago, so there still isn't a lot of genetic diversity out there. Wind energy infrastructure I kind of hit on. Climate change is another big one. Every model that's out there, predicts that the Gulf Coast where they winter at is going to, the sea level is going to rise, which moves the birds inland, and they lose all their brackish water where they get their blue crabs, and what's their primary source of protein down there. So there's a lot of concern about what's going to happen if the sea level does rise like they're predicting it will in the future. That's another big threat. Looking at chemical exposure, every year there seems to be a new chemical being applied to crops, and higher levels of it. Once they put it on for 3 or 4 years, it becomes ineffective, so they put more on. And then contaminant exposure. You get up into Canada, you got tar sands and crude oil, even these new pipelines coming through that are supposed to be bulletproof. They've already had one rupture in Kansas, so they aren't as bulletproof as they say they are. So there's a lot of threats and a lot of risks. So myself and a group of us got together and put up, oh gosh, probably a 50-page publication together. So it was a monster, but about just reasons why they shouldn't be downlisted or delisted, and put a lot of comparisons between other populations that are currently listed that are much more abundant than whooping cranes. So anyway, that publication should be coming out here hopefully the next couple months. With that, I'll take any questions that remain. Yes.
How many, eggs?
Whooping cranes will lay 2 eggs in a clutch. Generally, they both hatch, but sibling rivalry, the older chick usually kills the younger chick. So it's not all that common. You see twins coming through in migration. It happens every year, but it's more common to see single cranes come through. Another threat they face up in the breeding grounds, predation. There's wolves and the mountain lion, just different things up in the breeding area that take out the chicks as well. Yes.
How do we write letters to the fish and game, to Fish and Wildlife to get this, hey, we don't want this to happen?
There is it's not out yet, it's not posted yet, but there's a public hearing phase that usually lasts about 3 months. When that comes about, then I'll have to get you that information, but right now there's no one to send it to per se. Once that public hearing comes out, then they'll have contact information.
You put that on the Crane Trust
Yep.
page and everything?
We will.
Did the moving cranes
Years ago, go through North Platte.
They still do.
I can remember as a child that we would go out to see if we could find a moving crane. There weren't, 20 of them or something in the world.
Yeah.
And it was such a holiday if we saw one and we got to take a picture of it with our little Kodak.
Yep. If you're calling those, how many bonds see out that way? 5 or 6 maybe?
Yeah.
Something like that. Out by North Platte, Hershey, I mean, out that direction. So yeah, in that area. It is, according to the recent analysis, I guess, of the migration corridor, it's getting out there about the 99% of the corridor. So it's way less common.
Yeah.
The middle of the corridor is between here and Kearney. That's the dead center of the corridor when it comes through here. So we're nestled in right in the prime flyway.
I just kept thinking, I remember going to look for food. Yeah, I grew up in Northwest, we had a, growing up, it was a treat to go out, with the least you want to hear.
Yeah.
And that was such a fun word, yeah.
And it took Robert Porter Allen, he spent like 7 years of his life trying to identify where they were nesting at. That was back when there was 15, 20 birds. They knew where they wintered at in Texas, Aransas. They knew where they stopped all the way through. When you get up into Canada by the nesting grounds, there's just no roads to get through there. And so anyway, he spent 7 years trying to identify where they were nesting at, and finally figured it out. It was before he figured it out. Luckily, Buffalo National Park was already protected. It wasn't protected from whooping cranes. It was protected for the wood bison with buffalo. The fires that came through there nearly extirpated them, so they were almost gone. But luckily, it was already protected, so the breeding grounds have been protected long ago. Yes.
I don't see how you're just estimating on this count, right?
The 543.
Yeah.
They actually fly at Texas. They fly transects, and they actually physically count. And it wasn't but 2011 is the last time they actually tried to count every single individual. But that was back, I mean, they started doing that back when there were 75 or 100 birds. It's pretty easy to get to 100. Then you start getting up to 300, and it comes to a point where you gotta do surveys. They fly transects up and back, and they have obviously you're more likely to see them if they're right here, but if they're out there 3 miles, you're less likely to see them. So they have a way to account for that. They did some modeling, and they account for how many could be out there further that they just didn't see. And, so and their estimate also comes as like last year, or a year ago, it was 543 plus or minus 50 or something. So we're somewhere between 490 and 590. The center point on that was 543. So it is an estimate, but it's as good as you got.
Are they moving to the east as well in their flyway?
Yes, they are. Yep, and it's in the last 10, maybe 15 years, it's moved about 10 to 12 miles. So it isn't like they're moving 50 miles or 100 miles, but it's about 10 to 12 miles east of where they used to fly through their historic migration pattern.
They're kind of following the regular sandhill thing.
Yeah, it's wind patterns that are changing through time. The wind patterns have changed, so they fly where it's easiest to fly. Yes.
You said that they've been doing some blood draws and things, capturing some to do that. Are they doing any transmitters anymore?
Yeah. Yeah, this year actually there was more transmitter birds that had functioning transmitters than we've ever had. Then we started the putting radio telemetry on these birds back in 2009, 2008, the fall of 2008, I guess. And these new transmitters they're put on are lasting longer than the ones we originally started off with. And not only that, they, like I say, they give you information every 30 minutes on where the bird is. You get those downloads about 2, maybe sometimes 3 times a day. I can tell where every bird is, and if there's something in the area, if it's dark, I pack my bags and go in the morning, or I get up at the crack of dawn and call Colleen or my mom and say, let's go.
So how many would you estimate you have out of that?
Functioning transmitters, I'm thinking of about 50, about 10% of the population is about what probably has functioning transmitters. I think they marked around 125 birds so far over the last 15 years. And when they not only put the transmitter on, they put bands on them as well, so you can identify each individual bird. And
What's the lifespan?
30 years is a pretty old bird. I think it lasts a little longer than that, but 30 years is a pretty old bird. They don't start breeding until they're 4 or 5 though. And so it takes 4 or 5 years just to get a bird that can lay an egg. Then you have your reproductive prime and then downhill from there. Anything else? Yes.
Some of our data, when we're out with guests in the evenings, not mornings, in the evenings. It's indicated that the fossils have been found that are like, let's say, several million years old. Where would some of those, I had a question asked them, where are these fossils at so they can see them? Is there a location of some of these older fossils?
I have no idea. I haven't questioned the millions of years, but I mean, it's their carbon dating they're using, but I question how long that's been going on. There was another publication just came out recently that this hasn't been going on for millions of years of migration. Thousands of years is more likely, but none of us were around back then, so how do we know?
So as far as fossils,
I don't know where you can find them at now.
Dave,
I don't know.
all these cranes that's been found so far are at ash falls.
Ash falls up by Creighton.
And there is a couple of the fossils there, but the rest of them have been taken down to University of Nebraska.
Right. Yeah. Ash Falls is up by Creighton, Nebraska, so towards O'Neill and east, southwest. Yeah, that's Ash Falls, right? Yeah. Yep.
My guest always asked me, snow geese make such a mess, literally everywhere. And so my guest often asks me, well, does sandhill cranes make such a mess in the fields? Do the farmers not like to have the sandhill cranes in their fields? And I never
Farmers don't
seen a
like
sandhill crane coop, so I.
Yeah, they poop.
Know whether it's sandhill cranes or
But yeah, the farmers, because everyone I've talked to don't mind the birds at all, but they don't like all the vehicles that park in the middle of the road with both doors open and somebody jumping out of the car with a camera trying to get 5 steps close to the bird, and the bird's another 50 yards further away. They just don't get it. If they stay in the car, they can get a much better picture. But that's the part the farmers and the locals don't care for. And the trespass and the stuff that goes on that they don't like. But as far as the cranes go, I haven't heard of anybody that just like having cranes around here, I guess. And they actually get rid of the waste corn that would be volunteer corn the following year anyway. So it's actually a benefit to them. Yep.
Was the sound we were hearing the hooping cranes?
Those were
That was just some bird.
songbirds, yeah. I could hear the birds when I was out there, but the camera didn't pick it up. I could hear them actually calling and what have you, but you hear the other birds way more on the video than you can the little birds. Anything else? Thank you. Well, thank you guys very much.
I know the ones that come back every month. But yeah, need to fill out.